Hi guys, today I'm going to tell you what you need to know to plant a pecan tree from a pot. If you have a smaller pecan seedling or sapling that is not in a pot, the rules are a little bit different. So this is just going to pertain to the ones that you get in a pot from a landscaping supply store near your house. Typically these pecans are going to be between 4 and 6 feet tall when you buy them. The pecan you see here is actually the first one we planted about 6 years ago in our yard. It is closer to 15 feet tall by this point. Here's a look at the fruit and nut trees available from our local landscape supply store. Now this is a landscaping supply store that we trust, we use all the time, and we know they supply really good plants and trees. Typically, landscaping stores will also have a return policy on something like this, where if it dies within a certain amount of time, you can return it without any questions being asked. So just check with your landscape supply store and find out what their return policy is. To produce nuts, you need at least 2 varieties of pecan trees. So make sure you check the pecan tree for the variety and pick at least 2 different types. If you can have a few more or 1 or 2 more, that actually would help a lot more and just give it a better chance of the male and the female parts of each tree to be in season at different times so that they can pollinate each other. You also want to make sure that the pecan tree varieties that you pick grow well in your part of the country or your part of the world, wherever you are. Again, landscape supply stores are typically better for supplying trees appropriate for your area. Big chains like Lowe's and Home Depot will sometimes just supply the whole country with the same type of a product, and it might not grow very well in the region of the country that you're in. I have some more information about how long it's going to take for your trees to produce nuts and other things you need to know, but let's talk about planting it from the pot first. Do you remember in the video that I showed you a minute ago, some of the pots were short and some of the pots were really tall? This particular variety of pecan tree that we bought came in a short pot. It's better if they're in a longer pot because that lets the taproot, the thicker longer root that is usually inside the pot, it lets that taproot grow straight down. This tree obviously sat in this pot for far too long, so the taproot started winding itself around itself and became sort of a ball instead of a nice thick taproot that you want to point straight down so that it can go deep into the ground and get water as it needs to grow. Luckily, agricultural research has shown that trimming the root system on pecan trees is safe and it actually stimulates new growth and a stronger, faster, broader tree growth than you would normally get without trimming the root system. So we aren't trimming too much of the root system away. We are just loosening it up so that we can spread the smaller roots out and trying to get the taproot to be pointed down so that it can go down, as I said before, into the water table as it's growing and get as much water as it needs and as much nutrients out of the soil as it needs to grow. To expose the roots on this tree after we took it out of the pot, we sprayed it with a water hose to wash away the soil. So we wanted to be able to get to the roots and see what was going on before we actually planted this tree. Once my husband was done working on the taproot, he again was loosening the branch roots, those finer, smaller branch roots for the tree, because when we plant this tree in the ground, we want to spread those branch roots out so that they spread out in the ground and can reach as much nutrients in the soil as possible. We don't want them to start strangling each other, fighting for nutrients with each other, so we want this tree to have a broad root system in the ground. Pecans need fertile soil to grow in. You can usually find a county office. If you live in the United States, there's usually a county office that can assist you with testing your soil, or they sell home testing kits that can test your soil for you. I'll put a link to one in the description below to help you figure out if your soil is good enough for a pecan tree. Pecans grow to be very large trees. They need at least 40 to 80 feet between each tree for adequate growth. You also don't want them anywhere near your driveways, your sidewalks, your home's foundation, your pool, because the root system is growing just as wide as the branches are above ground. So just make sure that you are careful and you do not plant these trees anywhere near something that it could potentially crack or break later with its root system. So now that you've picked the right spot for your tree, it is time to dig the hole. So you don't want this hole to be any more than 2 feet deep. And you want to keep the tree, the thickest part of the trunk of that tree, at about the ground level, even with the ground. So you want that thicker part as the base of the tree, even with the soil. And you also want to make sure that the grafted part of the tree is well above the ground level. So it should always be that way when you buy it from a landscaping supply store. The graft should be about 10 to 12 inches above the ground level no matter what anyway. But just so you are aware when you're planting your tree. So my husband just showed with his hands where he wants to have that soil against that thickest part of the tree base. He's holding that tree straight because you want to start the tree straight and perfectly even once you are planting it or when you are planting it. And they're going to start pressing the soil down. So they've got those roots, those smaller, finer roots spread out so that the tree has a chance to spread out as it's growing. And they are going to push the soil down as they go. Press it pretty hard because you do want to have that tree firmly in the ground and lots of soil all around those roots. Using your feet to press it down is always helpful when you're planting a tree or generally any plant. You want to start that tree with firmly packed soil because that's going to help keep that tree standing straight up as it's growing. Sometimes if you have the soil too loose as it's raining or as it's watered, that soil will start to settle and you'll start to have a lean on your tree. So you don't want that tree to be leaning. You want to have it stay straight up and down. So keeping that soil really compacted around that tree in the beginning is going to be key to helping keep that tree standing up straight for you. Compacting that soil now also means that you won't have to come in, fill it in later when you see that it's settled and it's 3 or 4 inches lower than you expected it to be. At this point, my husband is creating a sort of crater-shaped well in the dirt that will help direct any water to the root or the base of the tree. To protect this tree from weeds, we typically put down a weed barrier and mulch. You could just go with mulch. You do want to make sure that there aren't weeds growing all around this tree because it will strangle some of the growth on the tree. It's going to be fighting for nutrients with those weeds. So you don't want that happening, especially in the first couple of years of tree growth. So just make sure that you're doing something to protect this tree from weeds in the beginning few years. After planting this tree, we watered it in with 2 big buckets of water. Typically, in the first few months, he will add another bucket of water about once a week just to prevent the root ball from drying out. And if during the summer for new trees, we will typically water them once a week too, just because it gets really hot here in Texas, and we want to make sure that this tree has every chance it can get to grow strong and survive. With that being said, we have planted 6 pecan trees in our yard so far, and we've never had any problems with growth, so they aren't a hard tree to grow. You generally want to fertilize your pecan tree each March and October, unless you have just planted the tree in those months. In that case, wait 30 days after planting the tree before you fertilize. An average pecan tree that you plant from a pot is still going to take 6 to 7 years before it starts to produce nuts. So this is the kind of tree that is going to take a while to grow and get to the point where it's fruiting. But I can tell you where I live in the South, having mature pecan trees in your yard is actually a sell factor for when you're selling your house. It gets mentioned in the listing and people like to hear that they've got mature fruit and nut trees in their yard. So even though you have to wait, I think it's definitely worth it. And in case you're wondering, the only reason why we put fences around our trees is because we have donkeys. So the donkeys will chew on the new growth on the tree. So we just put a nice little fence around that tree and the donkeys aren't able to get to it. So those fences will probably be there for 6 to 8 years, depending on the size of the tree when we remove it. Those fences are absolutely not necessary unless you have something like a donkey, a horse, a goat, cow, something in your field that is going to be wanting to chew on those trees. That's it for how to plant a pecan tree from a pot. Good luck with your pecan tree, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.